Hi, man, peace. So many brothers have asked me about Bitcoin and what I think about it. I caught this segment on the CBS Morning News in which they're speaking about Bitcoin. So, of course, I decided to use it as a backdrop. They're going to talk about it and I'm going to chime in.
We've seen the rise and fall of Bitcoin over the last few months.
And there's still a lot of mystery surrounding cryptocurrencies. Alex Dennis is back with a look at how it all works. Okay, on a break.
Well, before Alex Dennis starts, let me just give brothers a little bit of a background in the quote-unquote money system and how it will culminate in a system that is very much similar to Bitcoin, but of course they're not going to call it that. Let me say this, brothers. You have two types of goods. You have something called a capital good and you have something called a consumption good. Consumption goods are what we know as natural resources, like land, crops, livestock, water, things of that nature. Then you have capital goods. Capital goods are items like gold, silver, precious metals, things that actually can be used for what we call currency. Now, basically, at one point in time, gold was basically used as an accounting system to keep track of how much we had in consumption goods, meaning how much we had in crops or livestock or what have you. It was meant to act as an accounting system, which all money systems are basically used for. They're just an accounting system. When you receive your check at your job, you're automatically looking at the amount that you receive and how much you're going to have to spend to continue to live. Well, what happened after a while when people had gold or silver, they had to store it because if you don't find a place to store it, if you keep it in your home, it can get robbed. That's where we have the invention of banks. So you would turn in your gold or your silver or anything that was precious to a bank. And in return, of course, you would have to get a receipt, which would note how much you gave to the banker. After a while, because the receipt was easier to use than carrying around a big bag of gold, the receipt actually started to represent money. And that's where we get the advent of paper currency from. You know, a lot of people don't seem to understand what the relevance is of paper currency. Paper currency is okay as long as it's actually backed by gold or silver. And this is why in previous videos that I've done on the money system in the past, I've stated explicitly that if people were truly concerned about this country, this society, they'd be trying to march or protest to have the Federal Reserve dissolved. But they don't do that. Instead, they want to rant and rave about things that are irrelevant, like homosexual rights and transgender rights and bullshit like that. So back when a receipt actually could represent how much money you had stored in a bank, they were known as certificates, right? You would have a gold certificate. Now, back in the ancient world, they would utilize, coins. So whenever a society was starting to fall, it would normally be indicated by the fact that they were either producing too much paper currency, or in the ancient world, they utilized something called coin clipping. Like we study ancient Rome, they would have certain coins that they would start to meld into alloys. Instead of utilizing a silver coin, they would take silver and they would mix it with another coin. Or with another type of metal, like nickel or what have you, to lessen it, or copper. And that's what has been done here in America as well. And this is why I mentioned that one of the main reasons why Kennedy was killed was because he wanted to bring back the silver standard. He wanted to utilize silver coins. Now, once he was removed, you'll see that the plant that was placed in his cabinet, that being Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was a plant for the socialists, the first thing that he did was call in all the silver coins. And then they started to issue coins that were mixed with less valuable metals like nickel. Okay, so when you understand the money system, you know why you have things, a certain phenomenon known as inflation. Inflation is a way that the bankers use to control governments by printing more money. When you print more money, it lowers the value of the money. That means that you have to utilize more money to actually purchase items. So, like, for example, here in New York, people might wonder, how come the Metro card goes up every year and a half? It's because they're printing too much money. There's something called as hyperinflation when they print an extra amount of money than what is needed. And to be quite frank with you, all money that is printed is more than what's needed because there's no gold or silver back in the money. That's why you have to get rid of the Federal Reserve System. And it's only called the Federal Reserve to make people think that it's a part of the U.S. government. It's not. That's just a title. Okay? The Federal Reserve is not a part of the U.S. government. It is a private bank that was established so that they could put America in debt. And I've gone over this before. When America was just a group of colonies to the British Empire, they issued something called the colonial script. And the colonial script was paper money, but it was backed by gold. They never printed more of the colonial script than they had gold to back it. And that's why the American economy was so stable. In the middle of the 18th century, like somewhere around 1760, 1761, somewhere around there, you brothers could look this up. The Bank of England decided that they needed to destabilize the American economy. So they passed a law through King George III, who was a black man, by the way. They passed a law through him stating that the colonies would no longer be able to produce their own script. And because they were colonies of the British Empire, they had to adhere to that law. So that plunged the colonies into a state of economic debt. Ben Franklin is on record as stating that many people had to lose their vocations and many people were out of work because they were plunged into a form of inflation. What the Bank of England basically had King George tell the colonies is that they would have to issue bonds, give the bonds to the Bank of England as a request to borrow money from the Bank of England. The money that they borrow from them, they would have to pay back with interest. You understand what that means? So a bond is basically just a promise to pay. It's like it's basically like a note saying that when I get my money, I'm going to pay you. Here's this document in the meantime to prove that I owe you and that I recognize that I owe you. That basically is what a bond is. So the U.S. colonies basically had to issue bonds to the Bank of England, requesting that the Bank of England loan them the money that they would use in circulation in America, and then they would have to pay back all the money that they borrowed from the Bank of England with interest. That is a way that you can force your subsidiary to constantly be in debt. So when you watch the news and they talk about the gross national debt and how America's debt is at 22 trillion, that's purposeful. When they talk about, we want to solve the national debt, no, they don't. Because if they wanted to solve the national debt, all they would do is dissolve the Federal Reserve System. Okay? And go back to the gold and silver standard. At the very least, you can still print money, what they call the paper currency or the fiat money. But as long as you had the gold to back all the paper money that you print, you'd have a stable economy. Okay? So basically, after the colonies were forced to resort to borrowing money from the Bank of England, they got frustrated. That's really what started the American Revolution. It wasn't no damn stamp tax and the tea tax and all that stupidity. That's stuff that they tell you in the textbooks so that you don't understand that a national bank is really what's oppressing these so-called American people, really the citizens of America. And really that term means a debt slave. I've already gone over this. That's why your birth certificate is your bond number. You're basically the collateral for the debt that America owes to the Federal Reserve. So that brings us, after the American Revolution, that brings us to the late 1700s, where you have a man named Alexander Hamilton, who also had black lineage, and he became the first leader of the National Bank of the United States. The first charter was ratified, and he was the leader of the first national bank. After that charter expired, you had the second national bank, and there was a great issue between the second national bank and Mr. Andrew Jackson, who understood that the national bank was really just a subsidiary of the international bankers, and if it wasn't dissolved, it was going to plunge America into a state of gross debt. And I mentioned this already in previous videos. Andrew Jackson said, either I'm going to kill the national bank or the national bank is going to kill me. There were multiple attempts made on the life of Andrew Jackson to assassinate him. And I've stated in another video about Donald Trump and Andrew Jackson that I believe that Donald Trump is aware of that. See, Donald Trump is a Zionist, but whatever it is about him and his views on finance, he does not seem to be as copacetic with the international banks and the British Crown. When I say the British Crown, I'm talking about the financial center of the world, which is in inner London. He does not seem to be as copacetic with them as other presidents, which I believe is the reason why they rake him over the coals so much in the media. But anyway, the Second National Bank was presided over by Nicholas Biddle. The charter for the Second National Bank expired, and they tried to force America into renewing the charter by trying to destabilize the inner fabric of America and raising racial tension in the mid-1800s. Many of your abolitionists in the North were paid agents of the international bankers. They were paid to write literature about how poorly the black slaves were being treated. They didn't care about the so-called black slaves down south. They didn't care. And you know that they were in the North, and on the side of the South, you had the Knights of the Golden Circle with certain members like Jesse James. Their job was to foment antipathy for the North and the South. They're the ones who provoked secession. What the international bankers wanted to do was to fragment the South into basically private city states with each one having its own national bank so that they can get each southern state into debt, because the southern states were producing crops that were providing most of the revenue for the United States. That's really why the Civil War was fought. It wasn't fought to free the slaves. It was fought to cripple the South, because the South was threatening to take away a lot of the revenue that they were generating for the United States by secession, and Abraham Lincoln could not allow that. He also, by the way, understood that much of the atmosphere that was being generated in the United States was at the behest of the international bankers, which is why he was killed. Okay, that's why he was removed. So now we come to the late 1800s, and you have a man named J.P. Morgan, whose father, by the way, was an agent of the Rothschilds. J.P. Morgan was also heavily involved in the initial implementation of telephone lines all across America and also across the Atlantic Ocean. He was certainly a forward thinker. He was a banking mastermind, and he was, of course, an agent of the Rothschilds. So now around late 1800s, I'm trying to remember what year it was, like late 1880s or maybe early 1890s, he developed a company known as Northern Securities, which he basically was using to try to develop a monopoly on the railroad lines. Of course, he met a lot of opposition because of antitrust laws. So in order to get around it, the main politician who was against him developing that railroad monopoly was a man named William McKinley. They got William McKinley to change his running mate or his running partner, his quote-unquote vice president, when he ran for his second term. He changed his vice president to, I believe it was Theodore Roosevelt, who he didn't know was an agent of the banks. What they did, very similar to Lyndon Baines Johnson under Kennedy, is they just killed McKinley because he was trying to get in the way of J.P. Morgan. So they killed McKinley so that Theodore Roosevelt can become president of the United States and assist J.P. Morgan in maintaining the Northern Securities company that he was trying to use to develop a monopoly on the railroad lines. Around the late 1800s, they utilized a tactic known as a bank panic. Basically, a bank panic is, say for example, and I don't think a lot of people understand this, when you put your money in the bank, they don't keep all your money there. They take some of the money that you put in the bank and they use it to lend out to other people who are trying to open up businesses or borrow money for mortgages, things of that nature. So if you're a banker who's trying to compete with another bank, what you would do is you would try to start a rumor that bank is insolvent. What does that mean? That means that you tell the members of that bank, people who have deposits in that bank, that if they were to go and take all their money out, that the bank would not be able to do it. And you'd be correct, because all banks use your money to lend out to other people. Of course, on interest. That's how the banks make their money. So JP Morgan started a bank scare in 1893. He also started another one in, I believe it was 1906 or 1907, with the Knickerbocker Bank in New York City. That was a major bank run. Bank run is when everybody goes to the bank and tries to get their money out the bank because they've heard that the bank is insolvent, which by nature, all banks are insolvent. JP Morgan did that on purpose because he was trying to get the public at large to lose faith in the banking system so that they would want to turn the banks of America over to a larger international banking system. JP Morgan had the assistance and the aid of another operative, an agent per se, the dean. I believe he was the dean of Princeton University, Mr. Woodrow Wilson. For those of you who know who Woodrow Wilson is, he would go on to become the president in 1912 with the help of JP Morgan and the international bankers, because they needed a company man in office who would assist them in formulating a plan to develop what would become known as the Federal Reserve. So around 1909, 1910, JP Morgan and a group of fellow international bankers, Paul Warburg, I know was one of them. The Warburgs are a very famous banking family based in Europe. A few other notable men, some of them are skipping my mind right now, and a notable politician named Nelson Aldrich from Rhode Island. They went down to Jekyll Island, which is located right off the coast of Georgia, to develop a plan to create a national bank where they could basically scheme the people out of their capital goods, that being their gold and silver, and in turn get them to accept a fiat money system where they could print more money than what was needed to cause inflation, or take money out of circulation to cause what's known as a stringency. And that's what they did. In 1913, they passed the Federal Reserve Act, and 20 years later, well, you know what, let me not skip that far. Through the Federal Reserve, of course, they got the people to trust in a national bank, that being the Federal Reserve. And you had something called the Roaring Twenties. The Roaring Twenties was their first attempt to utilize a maneuver, a financial maneuver, where they would circulate more money and get the people to believe that they should borrow more money and try to open up businesses and purchase property. And what they did was they drew a lot of the money back that they circulated, and they also got people to trust in the stock market to make loans, to invest in stock. And they would invest in stock where they would only pay a partial payment for a stock. Like, say, for example, if a stock costs $10, they had a system where you only had to pay $1 and a corporation would pay the other $9, figuring that if the stock went boom, that you could easily pay back the corporation while you collecting your revenue. Well, they utilized a trick called a 24-hour call loan, where someone would buy they would pay for a partial portion of the stock. They would pay $1, figuring that they would have authority over a $10 stock by just paying $1. But the company will call back the person within 24 hours and tell them that we need you to pay back the whole thing because this stock is crashing. Well, of course, the people didn't have enough money to pay back all that money. So then they ended up, doing drastic things. That's where you get what you call the Great Depression. The Great Depression was used as a pretext to get the people to turn in all their gold to bring back financial stability to the U.S. economy. That is why Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed the gold clause in 1933 to make all the people who got suckered into the stock market in the 1920s, around the early part of the 19-teens, to reimburse the U.S. government so that the U.S. government could allegedly, quote unquote, pull the United States out of the financial deficit it was in. So that's really all the Federal Reserve System is about, is trying to find a way to take away your capital goods, that being your gold and your silver. Okay, so once again, if you want to solve the issue, you have to get the Federal Reserve dissolved. That's the only way. Period. because they're going to keep playing games with you, meaning what? They're going to have banks that issue you loans saying that here you can go purchase your house, you can pay for your mortgage, so on and so forth. And then they practice what they call predatory lending, where they raise the interest rates. Now you can no longer pay, but the principal that you put down, you don't get back. So now they get the principal that you paid, whatever mortgage payments you gave them, as well as the land and the house back. That's what's known as predatory lending. Okay? Those are some of the scams that they're running on people. But that brings us to Bitcoin. Why is that? Because in the aftermath of the mortgage scandal of 2008, Bitcoin comes out right after, which brings us to this segment. So let's let this run. I just wanted to give you guys a basic synopsis of the money system.
Break it down for you. It is the first decentralized digital currency and worldwide payment system, Bitcoin. And while there are other cryptocurrencies to choose from, many are still scratching their heads to the entire idea. So I sat down with a financial expert who explains it all for us.
Speaking of something I find interesting, did anyone read that article about Bitcoin I sent you?
See, this is why you should be a little hesitant and a little suspicious of quote-unquote Bitcoin, because by the time you get to mainstream news or mainstream media and they're trying to broadcast it or promote it on television, that means that they already have a plan on how to control it. Okay? As I stated, Bitcoin came out of nowhere, really, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, the mortgage crisis of 2008. All of a sudden, this entity, Satoshi Nakamoto, allegedly comes up with Bitcoin in aftermath of 2008 going in 2009. And it gets picked up by, some of his assistants, another man named Gavin Anderson. And supposedly, Mr. Nakamoto came up with Bitcoin under the inspiration of many cryptographers from the 80s. And a very famous one is a man named David Chaum, spelled Chaum. He was one of the initiators of the cryptocurrency craze of, the mid 1990s, which mostly was speculative. They were working on it, but it was brought to the forefront by this person, Satoshi Nakamoto, this entity. I shouldn't say this person.
It's become a popular term. Even the Big Bang Theory devoted an episode to the idea. Bitcoin. It's a type of digital currency known as cryptocurrency that has no real physical coin or cash associated with it.
So what? The fiat money that you're using has no real coin associated with it. Bitcoin is basically a method of currency, what they call cryptocurrency, which means that it's digitally encrypted. It was created by what they call a class of people on the internet known as cypherpunks, basically people who wanted to be able to engage in transactions online without being tracked. That's how Bitcoin first got popular. It was used on the dark web to purchase drugs and also purchase, to be quite frank with you, to engage in sex trafficking. A lot of criminality was utilized on the internet using Bitcoin. The thing is that you just have to be able to find a Bitcoin exchange where you can bring your Bitcoin over to them and then they can exchange it for actual currency, which quote unquote currency, that being the fiat money.
With it, eliminating banks. Jeffrey Levine, a finance expert, explains more.
What decentralized currency does is it actually eliminates that middleman, and instead there's a record of every transaction that's ever been made everywhere, and it's all publicly available. And that, by the way, is what you've probably heard of as the blockchain.
Yes, the blockchain, for those of you brothers who don't know, to just make it a little bit more easier to understand, pretty much imagine it like if you went to the store with $1 to pay for something. You were going to buy, say you went to the store with your son or with your daughter and you wanted to buy them some candy, and you gave the clerk a $5 bill, and that $5 bill had written on it every person who had ever touched that $5 bill. That pretty much is what the blockchain is. The blockchain is used to keep a ledger of every transaction that you make on the internet. And it's decentralized, meaning that there's no lead server. So speculatively, there's no way to hack into it. But of course, as we know, where there's a will, there's a way.
The blockchain technology tracks and validates each coin's value, making transactions as easy as swiping a credit card. So how is cryptocurrency valued? Basically, it's only worth what someone else will pay.
Exactly. And that's my point. Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, which is something that's being used by anarchists to try to promote a feeling of economic hope or a way to get away from the banks, is not really a currency, brothers. It's really just a stock. Okay? It's not a currency. It's just a stock. It's only going to be available for the most part on the dark web. The only way that you're really going to be able to use it in real world is if you can exchange it for money. And the only time that it's going to be accepted in mass is when it becomes regulated. That means when the government determines how it's going to be utilized, and that is only going to come in accord with the banks. So people who are trying to escape the banking system, you have to understand that the banking system is an essential part of this quote unquote kingdom, the fourth beast of Daniel, the 7th chapter. The banking system is an essential part of this kingdom. So a lot of anarchist Caucasians, just being real, are trying to escape the banking control because they understand that the Federal Reserve System is being used to oppress them. And it's not going to happen unless the banks get their cut.
If you go back to 2010, for instance, Bitcoin was worth a lot less money back then. Someone actually bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. Today, that would be worth about $150 million. Buys a lot of pizzas.
Store digital currency in an online wallet, on a USB drive, or a computer, but keep track of it.
That's right, you gave me your laptop. That was so sweet.
So you know where it is?
Of course.
Great.
I gave it to my ex-boyfriend, Zach.
Which supporters say is no different than misplaced cash.
Exactly. Which is why, in my view, eventually what they're going to do is the reason why they're trying to make Bitcoin so palatable for the public is because they're going to try to amalgamate the Bitcoin technology, the blockchain technology, first with your phones, and then eventually with that RFID chip. And that brings me back to Mr. Satoshi Nakamoto. It's very clear to me, that he is some form of a CIA disinformationist. I mean, for brothers who might not know the background, this person, Satoshi, he came up with this system of Bitcoin in 2009. He's working with a man named Gavin Anderson. Suddenly, Satoshi Nakamoto disappears, never to be seen of again. He created 21 million Bitcoins, which makes him really, truly the prime mover of the system. He is the banker for that system because he created the currency. Now, each Bitcoin can be split into an exorbitant amount of many Bitcoins. So speculatively, that is meant to be a money system that everyone should be able to use. Once again, they're trying to make Bitcoin something that is accepted in mass because they're getting ready to regulate it and most likely make it a mainstream currency. Because with this technology, they can track every transaction. They don't have to worry about street vendors who just want to use cash and they're not paying their taxes. Now, when you can no longer accept cash and you're living in a cashless society, every transaction is watched and therefore every transaction can be taxed. And everything that you do is based off of a tax, which is basically just tribute to the international bankers. That's how that works. So they're using this technology that supposedly was invented by the quote unquote cypherpunks, the anarchists. They're going to use it against them. And I'm pretty sure that they're going to outlaw any usage of the Bitcoin technology other than the strand of Bitcoin technology that will be developed by the global economy. You have to understand there's over 2.5 billion people on the earth who don't have a bank account. Okay? What does that mean? That means they don't have a debit card. That means they don't have a credit card. That means that their transactions are not being taxed.
The big question, is cryptocurrency the wave of the future?
I think that the underlying technology, the decentralization, the blockchain, that's here to stay. What I think is the more challenging question is knowing just which of these coins is actually going to be the one or the group of coins that what takes us to the future.
Is this a risky investment?
That's what everybody wants to know is should I invest in this? And really the first thing you have to ask yourself is, am I comfortable losing every dollar of what I'm putting into this investment? Because it tends to move and swing and, in large degrees in either direction.
Yeah, because all it is a stock. And it's going to be very volatile until they get rid of it. it's going to bottom out, and it'll probably bottom out after they introduce the government sanctioned Bitcoin, which you'll be able to use anywhere. They'll say you could use your Bitcoin on vacation. Once you'll get paid in USA coin, they'll probably call it something like that. And you'll be able to go everywhere and just, swipe your phone and you'll be able to pay. That's why they're trying to promote a lot of swiping with your phone, the Samsung Pay and the Apple Pay. All these things are just moving you towards all mechanized payment system. Okay? So that's what I mean when I say that 2.5 million people don't have a bank account. That means that all of their transactions cannot be truly watched. With a cash system, all of your transactions cannot be watched. And that's the thing. With the blockchain technology, they can verify every item that you bought or sold. And with the blockchain technology, there's an ID number associated with all your transactions. So I'm pretty sure that once they utilize the Bitcoin for a global form of economy, the ID number that they'll associate with you will probably be either your social security number or some other form of global ID that they'll develop or that they may already have for each person. Who the hell knows? Okay.
And while some have made millions,
You said that someday we'd regret this. And do you know what today is?
The day we found out we're rich and none of it is yours?
others have lost a lot. Invest wisely. So just to give you an example of the extreme swing in price, Bitcoin touched a peak of almost $20,000 in December, and today's value is about half that at $10,600.
Yeah.
Chris?
You see how she describes it? She describes it as a stock, not as a currency. That's why she's giving you the value of each Bitcoin according to dollars. What they're telling you is that the government said, you know what? It has taken enough hold on the people, it's gained enough notoriety that we're going to recognize it, but we're not going to recognize it as a possible competitor for real currency. We're going to recognize it as a stock. So brothers out there who want to invest in Bitcoin, you can do so, but you have to approach it like you would any other stock. Anything else that you invest in, meaning that it's going to be very volatile and that they can determine how much they want each Bitcoin to be worth. They had a Bitcoin exchange, one of the major ones known as Mt. Gox, which was holding the Bitcoins for many Bitcoin users. And supposedly Mt. Gox got hacked and those people lost their Bitcoin. Now, who hacked into Mt. Gox? They tried to accuse the owner of Mt. Gox. I believe his name was Karpelus, but you brothers could look it up. They tried to accuse him of what's the term that I'm looking for? Embezzlement. That's the term I'm looking for. Embezzlement. They tried to accuse him of embezzlement, of embezzling many of these Bitcoins. But it would not surprise me if they had some government hacker hack into Mt. Gox to make the users of Bitcoin believe that Mt. Gox was insolvent and that they would still have the same problems. But that shows you the mindset of the people. I mean, if you're using a cryptocurrency that's supposed to be point to point, why have someone else hold it? You should hold your own Bitcoin. That's what it was created for. So who knows where it's going to go, but I can only tell you what I see based off of the current trend. And before I forget, there's a very affluent financial expert named Blythe Masters. She's a Caucasian woman who used to be the CFO of JP Morgan Bank. And she is trying to adapt the blockchain technology for Wall Street and for the banking systems. That's what I mean when I say that the banks are only going to take this blockchain technology, which is basically just a ledger where they can keep track of all your transactions. They're going to take it and adapt it, which means what? They're going to get rid of the Bitcoin because the Bitcoin was just a Trojan horse to get people to understand and accept mechanized financial transactions. They want to get rid of cash. No more cash. Everything has to be kept track of online. And they really want to get rid of debit cards and credit cards too. There's no need for that anymore. They're going to put everything on that RFID chip. And that chick, Blythe Masters, she's off as hell too, man. Showed you how demonic a lot of those financiers are. She developed something called a credit default swap, which basically allowed bankers to be able to bet on bonds or loans that they felt like the borrower would default on. So not only would they predatory lend people who they knew could not pay back the debt. But then she developed a utility where they could bet on you defaulting and then make money off of winning the bet. So look, once again, if people are truly concerned about bringing financial stability to America or the world at large, you would be trying to dissolve the Federal Reserve System and go back to a financial system that is backed by actual gold. And that will bring stability to everything, but it's not going to happen because the international bankers pretty much have people wrapped around their little finger. That is why they invest so much money in promoting Marxist and socialist ideologies. Okay? But anyway, peace.